It was the first day of autumn when Mr. Grayson arrived at Willow Creek High School. The leaves outside had just begun to turn, a patchwork of burnt orange and deep crimson, but inside the old brick building the air felt colder than usual. Students shuffled through the halls, their voices low, their footsteps echoing against lockers. And then he appeared. Mr. Grayson wasn't like the other teachers. He carried no warmth in his eyes, no softness in his posture. His tall frame seemed almost too straight, like a soldier or a puppet pulled by invisible strings. His skin was pale, and his deep-set eyes were dark enough that some students swore they couldn't see the whites. When he spoke, his voice was calm, deliberate, but there was something sharp beneath it, like a knife hidden under velvet. The first time he introduced himself, the entire class fell silent, as if silenced by instinct rather than respect. He had been hired under unusual circumstances. The principal, Mr. Hanley, announced that Grayson would serve as a private tutor for advanced students, helping those aiming for scholarships or struggling with final exams. But to many it felt strange that a school as small as Willow Creek needed such a position at all. No one asked too many questions. The school board had approved him. His references were impeccable, though oddly vague. Worked at several academies across the state, was all they said. The principal beamed when he shook Grayson's hand. The parents, eager for their children to excel, welcomed him without hesitation. But some of the students felt the shift immediately. Emily Carter, a bright but painfully shy junior, was the first to notice. She sat in the second row during Grayson's first class, fiddling nervously with her notebook. His eyes swept the room like searchlights, and when they landed on her, she felt as though the air had been pulled from her lungs. There was something in his smile, too long, too deliberate. When he praised a student for a correct answer, the corners of his lips stretched wide, but his eyes remained cold. And when students stayed behind for private tutoring, Emily noticed how he always locked the door, sliding the bolt with a metallic click that seemed louder than it should. She noticed other things, too. Sometimes he wrote on the blackboard, quick and confident, but at the very corner of the board he scribbled strange symbols. They looked like shapes, spirals, or perhaps letters from a language no one recognized. And just as quickly as he wrote them, he erased them, his hand moving fast, almost panicked, as though the marks weren't meant to be seen. Emily told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was eccentric, maybe he doodled without thinking. But her unease grew. Within a week, the whispers began. In the cafeteria, over trays of pizza and chocolate milk, students leaned close and traded rumors. A girl named Kayla swore she'd heard from her cousin in another town that a man matching Grayson's description had been questioned in a missing person case. A student disappeared. 2 towns over. They said the last person who saw her said she left with a man in a long coat. Others dismissed it as gossip, but the whispers spread like wildfire. The janitors added fuel to the fire. One of them, Mr. Reynolds, a grizzled man with a crooked back, told anyone who'd listen that he'd seen Grayson in the classrooms late at night. "I lock up around 10, Reynolds muttered one morning to a group of curious seniors. "But sometimes when I walk past the old math room, I hear him talking. Not on the phone, talking to the walls, like he's having a full conversation with nobody." Some laughed. Others avoided the hall altogether. And then there were the students. After private sessions with Mr. Grayson, a handful of them began acting strangely. They came home pale, tired, withdrawn. Their parents said they were stressed from studying, but Emily wasn't convinced. Jake, her best friend, had been full of energy before tutoring began. After 2 lessons with Grayson, he barely spoke, his laughter gone, his shoulders heavy. When she asked what was wrong, he only shook his head and whispered, "Don't ask me. Don't ever ask me." Still, no one dared question Mr. Grayson openly. He was polite. He smiled for the parents. He charmed the principal, always ready with a compliment or a clever remark. The teachers liked him, too. He offered to help with grading, stayed late for meetings, volunteered for extra duties. But Emily couldn't ignore what she felt. It wasn't just unease. It was dread. One afternoon, she lingered after class, pretending to search her bag while the others filed out. Grayson remained at the board, erasing equations. Then, quickly, he drew a shape in the corner, a circle with jagged lines branching outward, almost like a sun, except the center was dark, filled in with black chalk. He stood back, staring at it for a long moment. Then he reached up and wiped it away in one swift motion as though afraid someone might see. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. When she finally looked up, he was staring at her again. That smile. Too long. Too deliberate. "Something wrong, Miss Carter?" he asked softly. She shook her head, stammering, "No, sir. Just looking for my pen." His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned away. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that he saw more than she let on, that he knew she was watching him closely. That night, lying awake in her room, Emily thought about the missing student 2 towns over. She thought about Jake's hollow eyes. She thought about the strange symbols, the whispers, the draining silence after his lessons. Something was happening at Willow Creek High School, and Mr. Grayson was at the center of it, but no one else seemed willing to see it. This expanded Act 1 is about 200 words worth of narration when spoken slowly. By and autumn deepened. Shadows lengthened earlier each day, spilling across the cracked pavement of the schoolyard, swallowing the corners of the old brick building. Inside, Willow Creek High felt different. The air in the halls was heavier, the fluorescent lights flickered more often, and silence lingered in places where it never had before. Emily couldn't ignore the change in her classmates. Those who spent time with Mr. Grayson were altered. They didn't just look tired, they looked emptied, as if someone had quietly stolen the spark that made them who they were. Their eyes lost focus, their voices dulled, and their movements slowed like puppets whose strings had been pulled too tightly. Her best friend Jake was the worst. Before tutoring began, Jake was full of energy, cracking jokes, drumming his fingers on the desk, always planning pranks. Now he sat slouched in class, his face pale, his eyes ringed with shadows. When Emily nudged him one afternoon, whispering, "Are you okay?" he flinched like she had struck him. His lips trembled, and after a long pause he whispered, barely audible, "Don't go to him. Don't ever. Stay after dark." Then he turned away, refusing to speak again. Emily's skin prickled. She had been scheduled for a private session with Mr. Grayson the following week. The thought of being alone with him behind a locked door filled her with dread, but her parents had insisted. "It's for your future," her mother said firmly. "He's here to help you, Emily. You need to take this seriously." So she went. The classroom was colder than usual, the air smelling faintly of chalk and something metallic, like rust or old blood. Mr. Grayson sat at his desk, hands folded, watching her with that too long smile. "Miss Carter," he said softly, "come in. Sit down." She obeyed, her chair screeching against the floor as she pulled it closer to his desk. He opened a notebook and scanned her equations. "You're bright," he murmured. "Very bright, but distracted." His hand moved to the blackboard. He began writing an equation, complex but neat. Then, without warning, he shifted his chalk to the corner. Emily froze. The shapes again. Spirals, jagged lines, strange angles that seemed to hurt her eyes if she stared too long. Her breath caught. She whispered before she could stop herself, "What is that?" The chalk stopped. For a moment the silence pressed in so thick she thought she might suffocate. Then Mr. Grayson turned, very slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. "A language," he said finally. His voice was calm, but the air in the room vibrated with something unspoken. "Older than you can imagine. Do you want to learn it?" Emily shook her head quickly, her heart racing. "No." For the first time his smile faltered. Just for a second, the mask slipped. His lips curled down, his jaw tightened, and in that flicker of an instant she saw something else beneath his human expression. Something hungry. Then it was gone. He erased the symbols with one swift movement and continued with her lesson as though nothing had happened. But Emily couldn't concentrate. Her skin crawled. She stared at the clock, willing the session to end. When it finally did, she bolted from the classroom, her bag half-zipped, her hands shaking. That night she couldn't sleep. Her dreams were filled with black spirals spinning endlessly, dragging her downward into a pit of whispers. She woke up gasping, clutching her chest, the sound of his voice still echoing in her ears. "Do you want to learn it?" The next day at school, Emily resolved to find out the truth. She lingered after classes, pretending to wait for her ride. Students filtered out until the halls were nearly empty. The sky outside turned dusky purple, shadows pressing against the windows. She crept down the east wing where Grayson usually held his private sessions. The door was ajar, Light flickered faintly inside. Emily crouched by the gap and peered in. Her stomach lurched. The classroom was dark except for the blackboard. On it, symbols glowed faintly, drawn in chalk but shining as if lit from within. Mr. Grayson stood in front of them, his hand raised, his lips moving. He was chanting, low, guttural, in a language she didn't recognize. And he wasn't alone. Jake sat in the far corner, slumped, his face blank, his eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. His lips moved in perfect unison with Grayson's chant. Emily's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Then Grayson stopped. His head turned sharply, unnaturally fast, his eyes locking onto the doorway, directly onto her. Emily stumbled back, but before she could run, his voice rang out, soft but clear. "Curiosity," he whispered, "is dangerous." Her blood turned to ice. The light in the classroom snapped off, the glowing symbols vanished, and when Emily dared look again, the room was empty. No Grayson, no Jake, just silence. She fled down the hall, her footsteps echoing, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. For the rest of the night she couldn't shake his words. They clung to her like a curse whispered in her ear. The next morning, Jake wasn't at school. Act 2. Emily barely slept the night Jake disappeared. She sat at her desk with the blinds shut, staring at her phone, refreshing her messages, waiting for his name to light up the screen. It never did. By morning, her parents told her Jake's mother had called. He hadn't come home the previous night. Police were looking into it. That phrase made Emily sick. She knew what it meant. They had no leads. But Emily did. She spent the school day in a fog. Every time she passed Mr. Grayson in the halls, her chest tightened. He was calm, unbothered, smiling as though nothing had happened. When teachers praised his dedication, when students waved to him nervously, Emily wanted to scream. He knows. He did something to Jake. By lunch, her fear hardened into resolve. If no one else would do anything, she would. That afternoon, she slipped away to the library. Willow Creek High's library was dim and rarely used, filled with dusty records that hadn't been touched in years. Emily searched the archives, pulling down old yearbooks, town reports, and newspaper clippings stored in yellowed folders. At first, nothing. Just page after page of mundane history, sports victories, bake sales, graduation photos. But then, buried in a folder labelled 1970s Missing Persons, she found it. The photograph was grainy, black and white. A man in a long coat standing in front of a school that looked eerily similar to Willow Creek High. His eyes were dark, his face pale, his build tall and straight. Beneath the photo, the caption read, "Isaac Grayson, private tutor, questioned in connection with disappearance of 3 local students, never charged, vanished before trial." Emily's hands trembled. Her stomach dropped. She shoved the photo into her notebook and kept digging. 1951, another report. Different town, different missing students. Same man, same description. Name unchanged, Grayson. And further back still, an article from the 1920s detailing disappearances from a private academy. A teacher had been dismissed under suspicion. The photo was smudged, but the outline of the man's face, it was unmistakable. It was him. Emily sat frozen, the weight of the realization crushing her chest. He hadn't aged, he hadn't changed. He had been here for decades, centuries maybe, moving from town to town, feeding on students and slipping away before anyone could stop him. She slammed the folder shut, her breath shaking. She wanted to run, to scream, to tell someone. But who would believe her? A 16-year-old girl accusing the most beloved teacher in school of being some kind of immortal predator. Still, she had to try. That evening, she visited her grandmother, who had lived in Willow Creek her entire life. Emily spread the photos and clippings across the table. Her grandmother's face went pale the instant she saw them. "I've heard the name," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Grayson. My mother told me stories when I was a girl. Stories about a man who wasn't a man at all. They said he travelled from place to place, always teaching, always looking for children. They said he fed on them, not their bodies, but their souls, their light. That's why they came home empty. That's why some never came home at all." Emily's throat tightened. So it's true. Her grandmother's hands shook as she pulled a silver locket from around her neck. Inside was a tiny symbol etched into the metal, an intricate spiral surrounded by jagged rays. "My mother said this protects against him," she said, pressing the locket into Emily's hand. "But only if you're strong enough not to look into his eyes. Don't let him speak his language to you. Don't let him choose you." Emily closed her fingers around the locket, her chest pounding. She felt both terrified and strangely empowered. She wasn't crazy. The whispers, the symbols, the drained students, it all connected. She had proof now. The next night, Emily returned to the school. She couldn't sleep knowing Jake was still out there, maybe alive, maybe trapped. She had to see for herself. The building was silent, the halls dark except for the glow of the exit signs. She crept toward the east wing, the locket cold in her palm. From down the hall, she heard it. That voice. Mr. Grayson's smooth, measured tone, except now it was layered, distorted, echoing as though more than one voice spoke at once. She edged closer, peering through the narrow window of the classroom door. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside, the desks had been pushed aside. Students sat in a circle on the floor, their faces blank, their eyes glazed. At the center stood Mr. Grayson, holding a knife with strange carvings etched along the blade. On the blackboard, the symbols glowed again, brighter now, filling the room with an unnatural light. Jake was among them. His lips moved in unison with the others, chanting the same guttural words. Emily's phone trembled in her hand as she raised it, recording the scene. Proof. She would finally have proof. But as she zoomed in, Grayson paused. His head tilted sharply, unnaturally, as if he had heard her heartbeat through the door. Slowly, his eyes lifted, locking directly onto the tiny glass of her phone's camera. Emily froze, and then he smiled. "You shouldn't be here, Emily." His voice whispered, not from inside the room, but right in her ear. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. When she turned back to the window, the room was dark, empty. The circle of students was gone, the blackboard clean. No symbols, no chanting, no Grayson. Only silence. Emily staggered back, clutching her phone to her chest. She wanted to scream, but her throat locked. She knew now, without question, Mr. Grayson wasn't human. He had been here for decades, feeding, hiding, waiting. And now he had noticed her. Act 3 summary. Emily didn't go to school the next day. She couldn't. She sat on her bed, clutching her phone, replaying the grainy recording over and over. The video showed only static now, no glowing symbols, no chanting students, no proof. It was as if the footage had been erased by some unseen hand. Her parents thought she was sick. Maybe she was. Her head throbbed, her skin crawled, her chest felt hollow. But beneath all that was one thought, clear and sharp. Mr. Grayson knew, and he would not stop. By nightfall, Emily decided. She couldn't wait for the police, couldn't trust the adults who adored him. If she did nothing, Jake was gone forever. And soon, maybe she would be too. She tucked her grandmother's silver locket beneath her shirt, grabbed a box of matches from the kitchen drawer, and stuffed 2 bottles of rubbing alcohol into her backpack. Her heart hammered as she crept out the back door. The night was sharp with autumn cold, the moon veiled in clouds. Willow Creek High loomed in the distance like a black silhouette against the sky. Its windows glowed faintly, though no one was supposed to be inside. Emily's footsteps echoed in the empty parking lot as she approached the east wing. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. She slipped inside. The halls were alive with whispers. They slithered along the lockers, curling in her ears, her name, spoken again and again. Emily, Emily. The exit signs flickered. The floor groaned beneath her shoes. She followed the sound of chanting down the corridor. It grew louder with each step, a low, guttural rhythm that shook her bones. Finally, she reached the classroom. The door stood wide open. Inside, the ritual was in full swing. Desks had been stacked against the walls. A circle of students knelt on the floor, their eyes blank, their mouths moving in unison. At the center was Jake, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temples, his voice trembling as he chanted words no human throat was meant to shape. And towering over him stood Mr. Grayson. His form wavered in the dim light, flickering between man and something else, something stretched and hollow, his skin translucent, his mouth too wide, his hands tipped with shadow that writhed like snakes. In his grip was the carved knife, its blade pulsing faintly as though alive. Emily's breath caught. For a moment she nearly turned and ran. But then Jake's eyes flickered just for a second toward her, a silent plea. She couldn't leave him. Emily stepped into the room. "Let him go!" she shouted, her voice cracking but strong enough to break the chant. The students faltered, their voices stuttering. Mr. Grayson turned. His face settled back into its calm human mask, though his eyes burned with something ancient. "Emily," he said softly, "my brightest student, I knew you'd come." Her hand tightened around the matchbox in her pocket. "I'm not your student." Grayson's smile widened. "Oh, but you are. You've been chosen. The others, they're vessels. But you—" He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a guttural growl. "You are strong, strong enough to learn." The locket around her neck grew cold, burning against her skin. Emily shook her head, backing toward the lab counter. "Stay away from me." He tilted his head, curious like a predator studying prey. "Do you think that little trinket will save you? Do you think fire will stop me?" His voice slithered into her mind, filling her skull with whispers. The symbols from the board flashed behind her eyes, glowing and spinning. She gasped, clutching her head. "Don't fight it," Grayson murmured. "It's easier if you let me in. You'll see things no human has ever seen. You'll live forever." Emily dropped to her knees, her vision swimming. But then her fingers brushed the cold metal of the locket. She gripped it tightly, forcing herself to whisper, "No." The whispers faltered. Grayson's smile faltered too, just slightly. Emily staggered to her feet, fumbling for the bottles of alcohol. She yanked one open, splashing the liquid across the floor, the desks, the circle of symbols. The smell of ethanol filled the air. Grayson's expression darkened. His calm melted into something monstrous. His jaw unhinged wider than humanly possible, shadows writhing from his mouth like smoke. Foolish child. Emily struck a match. The flame flickered weakly in the stale air. For a moment she thought it would die. Then she whispered, her voice shaking but fierce. "Class dismissed." She dropped the match. The fire roared to life, racing across the alcohol, devouring the symbols on the floor. The students screamed as the glow snapped away from their eyes, collapsing to the ground in confusion. Jake gasped, his chest heaving as if waking from a nightmare. Grayson shrieked. His form twisted, shadows tearing from his body in long, ragged strips. His skin bubbled and split, his face melting into a hollow skull. The calm mask was gone. What remained was a creature of smoke and bone, writhing and howling as the flames closed in. Emily grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him toward the door. Together they stumbled into the hallway, choking on smoke as the fire spread. Behind them the creature thrashed, its screams rattling the walls, shaking the lockers, shattering the windows. "Run!" Emily shouted. They sprinted down the hall, the fire chasing them, heat licking at their backs. They burst through the front doors just as the windows exploded outward in a shower of sparks and glass. Outside, the cold night air hit them like ice. Emily collapsed onto the grass, coughing, clutching Jake's hand. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have seen the fire. They watched as flames devoured the east wing, smoke rising into the dark sky. For a moment, Emily allowed herself to believe it was over. But as the sirens drew closer, she heard it, faint beneath the crackle of fire and the wail of alarms, a whisper. Her name, Emily. She shivered, clutching the locket. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind. He doesn't die. He waits. Jake leaned weakly against her shoulder. "Is it over?" he whispered. Emily stared at the burning school, her heart pounding. She didn't answer, because she knew. Somewhere in the smoke, in the shadows beyond the flames, Mr. Grayson was still smiling, and in her nightmares he would always be waiting for the next lesson.